and welcome to another edition of the Double A Team on the Barroom Network. I'm Ken Fang along with Stephen Negishi, and we have another action-packed show again today. We have two great guests, Michael Yam, host on the NFL Network, and our other guest is Lily Zhao, who is a reporter for Fox 6 in Milwaukee. And if you follow Lily, she has a great social media presence and also has a lot of things to talk about in regards to a certain team named the Green Bay Packers and a certain quarterback named Aaron Rodgers. They're just so boring, Stephen. Nothing ever happens in Green Bay. Nothing ever happens with Aaron Rodgers. So it'd be interesting to hear what Lily has to say in regards to the team and covering the Packers, who have been so boring over the last 2 years.
Well, we've been working to get these two for quite some time. And, with the Super Bowl officially over a week ago, I think it was fitting to have both of them on our show to talk about the 2021 season that just wrapped up with the Rams winning the Super Bowl, which both we predicted that we were, that the Rams would win.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhat of a very close Super Bowl game, which was very, very entertaining. And we will offer our thoughts at the end of the show about how we view the Super Bowl and overall halftime show and our favorite commercials, etc.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to talk about the elephant in the room over the last 2 weeks, which are programming for NBC. And that is, of course, a lot of promos and a lot of stuff. But of course, that surrounding those promos were the Olympics. So in Communist China, of course, the Winter Olympics wrapping up on Sunday, and the wrapping up after 17 days of glory. Normally, in a normal year, we will be raving about the Olympics. But Stephen, because of what happening with COVID, what was happening with human rights violations, also what was happening also with doping, surrounding the figure skating venue, this particular Olympics averaged around just 11 million viewers for NBC, which is the lowest of all time. And you compare that to 4 years ago in Pyeongchang in South Korea, in the Republic of Korea, average viewership was almost 20 million. So you see a lot of things going downhill. And really, Stephen, you and I had talked about this. We also talked about this with Professor Jules Boykoff a few weeks ago, right before I believe it was before the end of the year.
Right.
We talked with him in regards to what we thought about and how NBC would approach this Olympics, how it might not be well received. And those predictions came true.
Yeah, definitely. It was probably considered the Olympic from hell, I guess. You mentioned Pyongyang, and now again in Beijing. So 2 back-to-back Olympics in Asian countries. And I've been harping on this, Ken, if you remember. Pretty soon that all these major sporting events, if you also include the World Cup and everything, it will only be held in the Asian countries with a questionable human rights record, or a bunch of Middle East, countries with another, questionable human rights, records and reputation. And it's probably may have finally caught up to it. Thomas Bach, the IOC chairman, has pissed off many people in Tokyo back in the summer of last year with his tone-deaf statements and not just a statement, but actions as well. And certainly, even in this Beijing Winter Olympics, he was nowhere to be seen. And when he, offered a statement regarding the Katrina Valieva's doping, and the coach who was criticized by Bach, I think a lot of people are like, really? Like Thomas Bach has any credibility in making any significant criticism and like he's able to offer any sort of a reform that Olympics have really become more corrupt that Professor Boykoff have been preaching for many years.
Also, too, Stephen, is the fact that, and we talked about a bit about the figure skating venue, but also too in regards to Thomas Bach, as you mentioned. Um, he really didn't have much of a rebuke for the host of China. They always keep saying, we want to be non political. We are apolitical. We want to bring the world together. Well, we didn't really see. I mean, we did see athletes from the world and the youth of they always say the youth of the world gathers in one location. We try to bring the world together. And yes, indeed, we did see a lot of athletes from around the world over in Beijing over the last couple of weeks. However, um, China spokespeople basically tackled political issues. They talked about Taiwan. They talked about they denied any human rights violations about the Uyghurs. So they did everything they could to make us aware of who they were, led by a dictator and also being led by a communist government. However, at the same time, the IOC was trying to bury its head in the sand and also let people know that, yeah, we're apolitical, but we're trying to better the world. However, the people of at least of the United States and the audiences here in Canada and other countries, at least people who were looking at these Olympics with a jaundiced eye, a rather skeptical eye, pretty much knew what China was.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's between BOC, ROC, which stands for Russian Olympic Committee. It's not even the country of Russia.
No.
And then China, all three of them being elephant in the room. It's funny that Thomas Bach's continuing pandering to these so-called authoritative countries, nations, whatever you want to call it. It's just staggering and embarrassing that I think a lot of people must be asking serious questions. Do we really, really need Olympics anymore? I mean, is it even worth hosting going forward?
True. And also, you take a look at NBC's contract, which is in the billions and lasts until 2032. Now, granted, the last three Olympics, Pyeongchang in Korea, Tokyo in your native country, Stephen, last year was supposed to be, of course, in 2020, but had to be canceled due to COVID. And this last Olympics was just completed in Beijing. This cycle, first we've ever seen in three Asian countries, turned out to be it went on a downhill spiral for NBC. First, a very good, decent viewership in Pyeongchang, then down in Tokyo, and even worse in Beijing. You'll have to wonder if NBC may want a rebate or some type of relief because they're paying billions of dollars for the Olympics through 2032. So you're just wondering, maybe NBC is going to say, well, maybe the Olympics aren't worth as much as we thought it was.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting, with the viewership that is, considerably down all across the globe. Even in Japan, it was pretty much down, and a lot of sports. The cost is skyrocketing nowadays, and with the pandemic and the impact of revenues, you have to wonder: is networks going to start to wield a little more of their muscle, or they're just going to continue to look the other way and just continue to shell out more money just to, air 2-3 weeks at the expense of canceling their more popular, dramas and variety shows, going forward, whether it's cost effective or not.
Right. And then, of course, while the negative stuff was on our minds, and of course, this being in an Asian country, we have to talk about some great performances by some people in the AAPI community. Nathan Chen, of course, who I think really had a breakout Olympics in the figure skating venue. We also have to talk about Chloe Kim, who not only defended her gold medal, won another gold medal in addition to that, and also since she's come back has done the great tour on social media. So if you follow her Instagram page, you get to see a lot of Chloe Kim. And also we have Vincent So and Alyssa Liu. And of
Right.
course, there is one person who, um, another elephant in the room, Eileen Gu, who represented China, won a couple of gold medals, but at the same time is born in San Francisco. She chose to represent China. So let's talk a little bit about all of them, and a little bit about each. Stephen, first of all, great performances by people in the AAPI community, both the United States and, of course, Asia. Of course, native Asians as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Eileen Gu obviously chose to represent China. I forgot there was one other person, I believe, also born in the United States, also represented China. The name
Mhm.
unfortunately escapes me. But Bill Maher obviously took shots at her, and as well as LeBron and John Cena, for obviously pandering to communist China. But to be fair, I have nothing against Eileen Gu for representing, communist China, if that's what she wants to do. If
Right.
she thinks that that's going to increase her marketability, which obviously she's got significant follower on her
Mhm.
Twitter and I believe Instagram as well, and obviously already endorses several high-end, fashion brands, and makes millions off of it. Hey, listen,
Mhm.
that's her choice. You
Right.
know, if she wants to be a, maybe a communist spy, just for the layman terms, that's her choice too. You know, obviously, representing two countries, or at least being born and having lived in two countries. Obviously, Ken and I, you and I could obviously attest and somewhat sympathize to that side of who are we, the identification or identity that sometimes us Asians struggle with. and uh,
Mhm.
and obviously, Nathan Chan was obviously harassed by the Chinese national media, obviously being called the traitor because his parents are obviously Chinese Americans. um, the U.S. and China relations obviously has not been good at all, and it's only going to get more and more testy and frosty going forward. Um, it's a difficult, it's difficult for a lot of us Asian Americans, especially with the racism at an all-time high in this country, and for a lot of these athletes that the article that the Aldo just pulled up earlier, obviously written by Andrew Kay, who's also an Asian American himself, about the ice skating, which garnered a lot of criticism the way he wrote the headlines. Um, so it's something that all of us struggle, even with the
Mhm.
winning and the glory
Mhm.
that they certainly put up a very very good efforts representing the United States,
Mhm.
and and then once they get home, they have to wonder, was it really worth it? You know, do they struggle with the representing two sides? U.S. and China. Who are we?
Mhm.
Who are they really? Those things, that struggles that certainly they come up with all the time.
Mhm. Of course, in his defense, he did not write that headline. Someone at the New York Times, some editor, decided to mention the fact that instead of making it about, yes, more Asian Americans in the AAPI community are representing, they're basically saying at the expense of Caucasians, which was not really what he was trying to say.
Hmm.
However, it was not really done well by the New York. It wasn't a good look for the New York Times.
No, not at all, not at all. I wasn't attacking the guy who wrote the article by any
Right,
stretch of the
right,
imagination.
right, right.
And if you look at the article, although if you don't mind pulling it up again one more time, basically, you know, uh, even when I was young, there were so many, famous ice skaters who represented the United States. Michelle Kwan, you know,
Christy
and
Yamaguchi.
then exactly, I was going to mention that even before that. So, to say that, we're somehow domineering this sports, the way he put it, or at least the misleading headline that the New York Times put together, was a very, very demeaning, and that might raise another red flag, or just incite more anger from white or African American parents who just want their daughter or son to be successful without us being targeted. You know what I mean, Ken?
Right, exactly. And the article, as you see there, the American pipeline, the Asian pipeline going into American figure skating, it's only made the sport better. I just felt it made it better. However, the tweet and the headline that went around it saying vividly overrepresented in ice rinks and competition. I don't know what exactly you're trying to say there. Are you trying to
No,
say
I
that
don't either.
Asians are doing are doing that at the expense of whites? I'm not sure exactly what they were going at. It's not a very good look for the New York Times. They didn't take it down. There was no real apology over it, and I'm just wondering where the person who wrote that tweet and the headline, and not the one that you see there, Asian American pipeline. That's fine. I think that is a fitting. Um, that is a very fitting headline. But the one saying that the API community is overrepresented in a disproportionate way as opposed to other sports, that's just really unfair. And again, as you mentioned, it only tends to really stir up xenophobia against the Asian community.
Absolutely. The biggest irony is the guy who wrote this is Andrew Keh. He's a Asian American writer himself. So honestly, he took a lot of backlash on the comments, I believe, on that Twitter handle comment section, and he came to his own defense. And obviously, that's not how he wrote it, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously, unfortunately, the damage is done. So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's a learning lesson for even all of us how we phrase things.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, and it's something that even a lot of Asian people, as you can see there, a lot of people. Oh, there it is. There it is. The vividly
Let's
Tony
see.
Choi below right there. Andrew K. That's the gentleman who wrote this article. Hi, Tony. I'm happy to chime in. I used the word after hearing in conversation with multiple Asian sociologists. It literally just means that participation is clearly disproportionate to the population stats cited in the same sentence. There's no judgment baked into it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the people that he talked to, whoever it is, and I
And they
and I, and
lost
I
you.
shot back right there. You're somehow okay with this? Did one of your overzealous white editor make you come up with this? Okay, and I wrote and I responded, um, but yeah, it's not a good look when an Asian person writes something that would anger the AAPI community. I mean, even if it's overrepresented, it's not like the skating, the U.S. figure skaters are overly represented by us Asian Americans,
Mm-hmm.
even historically. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, overrepresented is really um, a really misleading statement there, and really hoping I don't know what lesson the New York Times does, because they do a lot of things that really baffle me, like buying Wordle. But again, that's another story for another day. Well, I
sure.
won't get into Wordle. So, by the way, I do not post my Wordle score on any of my social media platforms. You don't care about my Wordle score, nor should you. So I
No,
don't
no,
put it
no,
up
no.
there. Although I did
I
solve
haven't
it.
even jumped on to the Wordle, so I'm already late to the party there.
That's okay. I did solve it today, but you don't care, and I'm not going to tell you how many times it took me. All right. In any event, so before we, thank you, you're welcome. Stephen, before we wrap up this segment, before we go on to the next segment, when we'll go there when Michael Cam is ready to appear. Do we think that the Olympics, have they really run its course? Are they obsolete in this day and age? We have so many other competitions, world competitions. We have like the X Games, which of course is trying to be, which it may ESPN. The rumors that they may sell them because eventually Disney might feel they're not profitable. But we have other competitions. We
Mhm.
also have the World Cup of Hockey for the NHL, which the NHL is trying to promote. because NHL players have not gone to the last two Olympics. Do we feel that, do you think that maybe we'll see maybe a downgrading of the Olympics, or maybe just the fact that this is just a bad cycle for them?
It's hard to say. I know I was saying that maybe, have we run its course? And I think it's a legitimate question to be asked. If a change in leadership changes things, then I'm all for it, because I think Thomas Bach has shown nothing in his tenure, especially in the last couple of Olympics, that he is a capable leader. He has shown to pander to the authoritative state. What we saw with the ROC, his criticism sounds hollow, which I should have used the term hollow when he criticized Katrina Valieva's female coach, Eteri, I think Eteri Tubazeri, I think that's how it, if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. But you have like a young 15-year-old girl who obviously takes doping to obviously sustain her success at that level, which is obviously, young girls like her obviously being discarded after one Olympics. And that's a huge problem that needs to be significantly revised, in my opinion. We had the other Russian skater who finished second was caught screaming, "I hate this sport." And the athletes are under immense pressure, having to be used as a pawn for this. And then you had ski jump. There were even a lot of controversies that players were being disqualified because of the size of the suits that they were wearing all of a sudden. And it's just nuts. Where's IOC? Where is WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency? Where's the leadership in all of this? The leadership vacuum is just simply staggering. And it's one thing that I've kind of learned, Ken, during this pandemic, which is still unfortunately ongoing, is that the simple vacuum and the lack of leadership has become more and more prevalent than ever. And there are certain people like Thomas Bach who are benefiting from the outdated system that they want to maintain for their own personal gains and prosperity. We've seen that with the FIFA and the UEFA as well, where people like Michel Platini, who disgraced his and tarnished his legacy because obviously he was caught taking bribes and stuff, and nothing has really changed. So maybe we need to demand more. NBC needs to squeeze a little more for the amount of money that they're paying. They shouldn't be just going along for the ride and just turn a blind eye on these things. There has to be some sort of a consequences. And if NBC has to pay for it, then so be it.
Right. I mean, you mentioned what happened to the figure skater, Katrina Valieva. Her coaches basically hung her out to dry. Instead of showing some compassion after the free skate where she's crying, her coaches are yelling, "Well, why didn't you do this?" Or "You blew it," basically. And as you mentioned, the other Russian figure skater, by saying, "I hate this sport," is just a lot of pressure on. We have to remember, these are kids. These are teenagers. These are 15-year-olds. They're not 27-year-old like Lindsay Jacobellis, who after 4 Olympic Games came back to redeem herself in the Olympics after falling down in Turin in 2006. She finally won her gold medal and finally won a second gold medal. And I think a lot of she had experience. She had life experience. When you're 15, you don't have life experience. No. You really don't. You're basically do what you're told. You're used to a coach saying, "This is what you're doing. Or take this, or do this, or this is what you're going to have to do, or diet." I mean, at 15, you don't really have any recourse. You don't have that life experience, as opposed to a Shaun White, as opposed to a Lindsey Jacobellis, as opposed to someone who is in their late 20s or 30s who has that, as we mentioned, that life experience and knows what's going on. Um, Figure skating, unfortunately, is a young girl sport like gymnastics, and we've seen some of the cost that we in these last two Olympic Games over mental health, Stephen. And I have a feeling that I don't know what the International Skating Union is going to do about this. I don't know what the International Olympic Committee is going to do about this, but someone has to. We saw some of the downsides of figure skating. It's a beautiful sport. It really is a beautiful sport when done right. Pairs figure skating, ice dancing is beautiful. But when you see small girls, teenagers, 15 years old, with the pressure breaking down on the ice, there's something wrong here.
Absolutely. Even in this country, Ken, we had a number of high schoolers who went straight to the NBA, as you know, 18 years old, 19 years old, straight out of high school. And obviously don't have a lot of life skills. They don't know how to manage money. They're not mature enough, obviously. And I know the argument is if you're old enough to serve, in this country at 18, whether it be Marines, Army, Air Force, or, Navy, then you can go straight to the NBA. And I get that argument. But, there have been many, many instances where for every Kobe Bryant, I'm so sorry.
And LeBron.
And LeBron, of course, and Kevin Garnett. There's countless high schoolers who have failed miserably. We're out of the league, in only a couple of years. And, those are parallels that, what we see in the world of ice skating, the ugly side of it, we've seen that in this country as well. So, I pray that these young athletes, regardless of what their sport is, whether it be basketball, and in this case, ice skating, that they get the respect and the treatment that they deserve. And obviously IOC and the Skating Federation, this has to be a wake up call for many of them.
Mm-hmm. And one of the commentators on NBC, Tara Lipinski, who was 15 on her own when she won in Nagano in 1998. She can sympathize and emphasizes what happened with Katrina Valieva. She totally understood. Also criticizing the system in Russia for the doping, feeling that she shouldn't have skated. Both she and Johnny Ware both came out with their statements, heavy statements. But at the same time, after she basically failed, she came out with a lot of empathy. And, that's what these kids need. They need empathy, and they need some type of guidance. And I wish that, I don't know what I'm sure that the Russians are not going to change their system, but at least in the United States, maybe there's some type of reform, and the International Skating Union can do something in regards to, especially in a sport which has become basically gone from the 1970s and the 1950s, when you saw skaters who were quite in their 20s and maybe mid 20s, and now you're seeing a sport with preteens and teenagers. And the unfortunate thing is that when they get to be 17 or 18, their bodies change and they basically can't skate the way they used to. They're basically thought as has-beens in this sport. So, and you'd hate to think, and a lot of times when you're in other sports reaching 17 or 18, you're beginning that uphill climb and you're beginning to find who you are. But you hate to see in a sport like figure skating and gymnastics, Stephen, that a sport like that, where girls, and of course Simone Biles is an exception, and she's in her 20s. But you'd hate to see sports like these where young girls are basically thrown away, like are thought of a dime a dozen.
Absolutely, you have to worry about their overall health, both physically and mentally. And when you live in when you come from a place like Russia, obviously, they've known to be, for many, many years, doping was a norm, under the communist regime, along with the East Germany, et cetera, et cetera.
And of course, China in the early when they started becoming prevalent in swimming and other sports, we also know that China used those same East German doctors in the 1990s as well.
Absolutely, and something has definitely needs to be changed for the betterment of the sports, I should say.
Right. Well, let's take a break. We're going to take a break right now. We will eventually have Michael Yam of the NFL Network. When we come back in the next segment, we'll talk football. Of course, the Barroom Network. This is a network we like to talk about a lot of football. So we'll continue with that. We'll talk about the Super Bowl. We'll also talk about some of the interesting things that have been reported about the upcoming season. Yes, even though the season ended last week, we can talk about some of the interesting things that have come out about some of the requests by the networks for the upcoming season. We'll have that all and more coming up on the Barroom Network and on the Double A team as we continue right after this.
So what exactly goes on at the NFL Combine? I asked Greg Gabriel that question, and he said there's more than scouting going on.
Everybody involved in the league is at the Combine. So you got the coaches, the front office, you got your cap guy there. Your medical people are obviously there because of the Combine. But your whole personnel staff is there. Every agent is there too. Theoretically, you can't negotiate a contract with some of these free agents from other teams. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff being done down at Indy. And you don't have to lock into certain figures, but, you'd say, and I'll just use the name Joel Siegel because I know Joel. And Joel, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I'm not saying you do this. I'm just using your name. So here's Kyle Fuller's agent.
Okay.
But he says, hey, Joel, you got this player. What's it going to cost? Mm-hmm. Well, I've talked to about 4 teams already. It's going to cost you at least $12 million a year. Mm-hmm. So you're getting that type of stuff. Then you're going to, does he want to come here? Do we got a chance? And you can't talk to the guy because it's, that would be tampering.
Right.
So, but the agent can. Even though you're not supposed to be talking to the agent.
We're back with the Double A team here on the Barroom Network. I'm Ken Fang along with Stephen Negishi. And Stephen needs you to unmute yourself here because we do have a guest upcoming, but let me first talk about a couple things that have been discussed today on this Monday, the day we're taping, in regards to the upcoming NFL season. I know the season just ended, but why not talk about the new NFL season while we can? The networks have already started making their requests. John Orand over at Sports Business Journal came out with a great article today in regards to what the networks are doing. This upcoming season is the last of the NFL media contract. And interestingly enough, Amazon is asking for a Black Friday game because they're not going to have a Thanksgiving game because CBS, Fox, and NBC have Thanksgiving Day monopolized on that one. So Amazon, which is going to be in its first year of not televising, streaming Thursday Night Football this season, is asking for a Black Friday game, and actually it's in their contract. The NFL is said to be lukewarm to that idea, but we'll see if they decide to do something like that. Looks like ESPN Plus is going to get an international game, most likely in London. We know there's a game in Germany that was announced last week. There'll be a game in Mexico and 3 games in London. So we're going to have 5 international games. And also, Stephen, we know that Christmas Day for this upcoming year is going to be on a Sunday. Both CBS and Fox have asked for Christmas Day games. So, Stephen, your quick reaction to all that stuff that I just told you.
Well, I did read the Black Friday game. I thought it was pretty telling. Obviously, Amazon makes their big money, obviously, during the holiday season. But, honestly, I've always felt that Friday would have been more suited than the Thursday night football game, to be honest. I know there are many places in the country, obviously, Friday nights are for high school football and all that stuff. But I even with that, I don't think the the viewership would fall that behind. Obviously, Friday night, a lot of people obviously sometimes stick around and watch football games. I'm sure that the movie industry aren't too keen on having a football game on a Friday nights, but we'll see. And the German game, as somebody who've lived in Germany, I'm very, very excited. It will be in Munich this year, and then followed by Frankfurt in 23. So the next 4 years, even years in Munich, odd years in Frankfurt. And obviously, the NFL, I believe last month, released the international market territory for the global games. Obviously, certain countries obviously have certain territorial rights for those games. I could see Kansas City and Tampa Bay, obviously, maybe rumored to be the first ever game to be played in Munich. So it'll be interesting. I think Germany, from my time living there, has always had a strong NFL interests. Frankfurt being such a diverse city, global city, obviously home of a European Central Bank, and it's also close to Wiesbaden Air Base, military base where U.S. Army is stationed. So there's that aspect of it.
And let's not forget how well NFL Europe did quite well in Germany as well. So
yep.
And this transitions quite well to our very first guest. He's from the NFL Network. He's also worked at the Pac-12 Network and also at ESPN. Let's bring in Michael Yam. Mike, how are you? Nice to talk to you. We followed each other for many years on Twitter. Nice to finally talk to you.
Absolute pleasure, guys. I really appreciate the invite. Enjoy that conversation on what day of the week we could get some NFL games. I feel like the calendar is 12 months a year, but I would not be shocked. I think if Amazon wants it, there's a pretty good chance. But I think, Stephen, your point on high school football a little bit earlier, I think is a good one. I don't think the NFL would want to invade high school football. That pipeline long term, I think they value that in a big way, just like they value the pipeline that comes with international games. And I know you guys highlighted a couple of those. But I'm getting right down to business. I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's hang out. Let's have a good time. It's good to be with you guys.
Well, I've been working for quite some time to have you on for a long time. And I'm very, very honored to finally have you on as a guest, Michael.
I got to tell you guys, been tracking some of the shows. It is rare. I'm like in a show open. I was like, yo, let's go. Like this is pretty cool. I know we don't have like a ton of options in our community, but at the end of the day, definitely appreciate you guys highlighting, the folks in our community and certainly, who are passionate about sports.
Mike, you started, you got the national start, of course, at ESPN, went to Pac-12 Network, and then moved over, stayed on the West Coast to go over to NFL Network. What's been the journey like for you?
Wild. Ken, I think if you would have told me as a kid that this would be my job, I would have said you're crazy. First of all, I didn't even realize that this was really a viable career path. I know you guys obviously make a living in sports. The reality is there's not a whole lot of folks that look like us. And when I was a kid, there really wasn't a lot to begin with. So, I was a sports fan. I watched the games, and I know that sounds really naive, but I didn't put two and two together that you could, like, there's people, I was watching the games. I knew they were broadcasters, but that old adage of need to see it to believe it is certainly rings true for me. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. That's kind of my whole life. That's what I thought the path was going to be for me.
Yeah.
And, and then I pivoted after, one semester when I was at Fordham, and just, Ken, you mentioned the journey. It is. I say this. When you mentioned the Pac-12 Network, I was really fortunate to be there for almost 10 years, and I got to talk to a lot of students. And every time I would talk to the students, I'd say the same thing. You're not going to find a broadcaster who's luckier than I am. Like, I just think about how things have fallen into place in my career, the people who took an interest in me that didn't have to take an interest in me, that were huge mentors in my life. And, without them, I don't think I would have been able to get some of the opportunities. And hell, it was, to be totally honest with you, a little bit of a dark time after the Pac-12 thing, because I didn't see that coming. And then all of a sudden, I land at a place like NFL Network. So it just, like I said, I know it's not all luck, but at the end of the day, just being in the right place at the right time and having people take an interest in me for whatever reason has been sort of the game changer for me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I apologize. Mike, can you give us like a day of your life as an NFL broadcaster? What time do you get up? What time do you leave? And what time do you go home, etc.?
Okay, so Stephen, you're asking me a question that is a little bit more difficult to answer today because it was the first time in all week I will be getting up at 2 a.m. to get to the studio at 3 a.m. So that's rare, though. This is the first time I've done it. So the fact that it's 5:38 Pacific time right now and I am still awake is somewhat shocking to me at this point. But guys, I'll be honest. Like I've been kind of all over the map at NFL Network, and it's been a really cool existence so far. When they had hired me, I was on a deal where I was able to work from home. I did a little bit of reporting for them. And then, Ken, we were talking about sort of luck before, when the 49ers had the third pick in the draft last year, I happened to be in the Bay Area and they had given me a call. One of my bosses said, "Hey, do you want to cover, the Niners for us and do the draft?" So of course, what's your answer? No, like, hell yeah. Like, yeah, I want to do it. Yeah, that'd be great. The problem for me was, I haven't really been a reporter. Ken, you'd made reference to some of the stops that I've been at. And, my first TV job was at NBA TV and I've always been sort of a studio guy. So when they called and they asked me, I was like, you say yes. And you hope that you're going to do the best job you can. I know the effort was going to be there. I wasn't going to slack, but at the same time, it's not like I have a ton of sources. Been working in college football, for the last decade. And then I realized, well, there's a lot of people in college football who know the NFL people, and the NFL people know the college people. So there's going to be some tie-ins there. And, you just start working the phones. And so they've had me, Stephen, doing some reporting. I got to do the NFLPA collegiate game a couple of weeks ago. Got the call. They said, "Hey, can you go to Vegas for the East-West Shrine game?" I said, "Sure." So I ended up in Vegas for a week to do some of that stuff. I've had opportunities to do Total Access, and I did a Super Bowl live show, which is crazy to me. That was my first experience doing anything Super Bowl related in my career. So that was pretty cool. That old phrase, guys, in sports, outside of sports, they always say, "Oh, this is like our Super Bowl." And then when you work at NFL Network, you say, "Oh, it's actually the Super Bowl," which is what we do. So it was, a really exciting time. But the short of it, Stephen, is just kind of be ready for whatever assignment comes my way.
One thing that you just, as you mentioned, finally coming down from a very busy week, the NFL Network had an opportunity to have what was known as a home Super Bowl because you guys are based at SoFi Stadium. People may not know that, but you're in the same park as SoFi Stadium, so you guys really didn't have to move. It's usually every year you guys set foot and set base camp for a couple of weeks in the home of the Super Bowl, whatever host city that's going to be. This year it was in Los Angeles. What was it like to saying, I get to sleep in my own bed? Oh, I get to drive to the studio and do my normal commute for the week and have a special time for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's, you hit the nail on the head there, Ken, because I think a lot of people are so comfortable with the fact that this is sort of our backyard, but yet at the same time, our studios are brand new. And I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to make it out to the West Coast, but when you do, please give me a call and I'll give you a tour. You will be floored
absolutely
by what's there. I had to do some shifts in Culver City where the old studios were. And I had a boss call me and he said, "Look, I'm glad you're coming to Culver just so that you know the difference between what it was and what it's going to be." And it's a remarkable place, guys. I mean, every time I'm in the building, and I know there's a little bit of that new car smell, but every time I'm there, even at 3 a.m, when I tell you I wasn't totally awake, but there is a sense of comfort and pride and being around an environment like that. That's really unique. But Ken, you're right. Like, people were pretty happy about that. That the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of travel that was involved. I was doing some radio shows for Sirius XM on Radio Row, and it was in the LA Convention Center. And I'm still, look, when I was in the Bay Area in San Francisco, I walked to work. Okay. Like, I live close. It's kind of a walking town. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're going to be driving in Los Angeles," and the whole thing. I'm still trying to figure out these traffic patterns. And, a couple weeks ago, when I'm headed to Pasadena for the NFL PA Collegiate Bowl, I mean, that traffic was no joke. But to even get, I look at, my phone without, Google Maps, I'm screwed, right? I put it in and I'm like, oh, it's like 7 miles from where I live to the convention center, no big deal. And it was taking over an hour sometimes to get down there. And I'm like, okay, what everyone has talked about is sort of crazy. So Ken, for as much as I think people enjoyed sleeping in their own bed, if I happen to be in a hotel really close to where Radio Row is going to be, that might have been a little bit more comforting in the mornings. But it is nice to be in a normal routine.
Full disclosure, I used to live in SoCal myself back in the 80s and 90s. I lived in the Torrance, Redondo, Palos Verdes.
Oh yeah, we're like neighbors then. Where we used to be, so.
Yeah, and Gardena, I went to a dentist, Japanese dentist there, and I drove through Inglewood a few times to go see a game and exhibition matches and stuff like that. And I know, Inglewood obviously kind of somewhat of a seedy, somewhat, very dangerous area in some areas, obviously.
Yeah.
For many old school fans, they'll probably remember watching the Lakers game, obviously, the Great Western Forum. There. And then obviously the stadium that used to be the Hollywood Park, right?
So Hollywood Park is where SoFi and NFL Network is currently. But Stephen, you're right. I mean, I think the perception and the persona, and this is a guy that just, I just moved down here mid-December, but that was sort of the aura. You'd be surprised though, because it sounds like it's been a little bit since you've been down there. There's certainly some areas that are, it's not like I'm hanging out in the middle of the night and, it's sort of looking over my shoulder a little bit, but you'd be surprised how much up and coming aspects of Englewood there really is, especially with NFL Network, with SoFi Stadium. Even my path once I get off the highway, there's a lot of new buildings that are going up. There's a brand new Starbucks there, so you get your coffee still on the way into work. So there are some things that just built a target, and I think the whole point is to invest some dollars into that community to sort of lift it up.
We talked a little bit earlier, Mike, about representation and how when you were growing up, there wasn't too many Asians on TV, but who were the role models for your growing up? And what is it like when you talk to younger people now who may be Asians, wanted to get into TV, who finally say, look, I'm watching you now on NFL Network as I want to get into this business.
Yeah, it's it's crazy because to your point, Ken, there wasn't many of us that were certainly on air. And I think, to be totally candid with you, I don't think I realized pretty late in life that this was a job, but I think a lot of it had to do with seeing Michael Yam on ESPN and ESPN News would be able to catch him. And, I always call him kind of the godfather for Asian American broadcasters. And I'll never forget, when I got hired there, he's such a humble guy. And, I was in my cubicle, it was my first week there. And next thing I know, I hear someone say, "Hey, Mike," and I turn around, it's Michael Yam. And he puts out his hand, he shakes, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Michael Yam. I want to be like, dude, like, are you?" "Yeah, I know who you are." It's like, it's like the same thing with, when I was in makeup and Chris Mullen introduced himself. I'm like, dude, like, you don't need to introduce yourself, bro. Like, I get it. But, it goes to show you sort of that level of humility that both of those guys have. And I think, the really cool thing about Michael Yam, that is he never made mistakes. I mean, he'd probably tell you, like, of course there are shows that there's an issue here and there, but just like this, just so even, so smooth. And I got to do a lot of shows with him, which was sort of a thrill for me over the years. But Ken, I think one of the sad realities of this business right now is last 10 years or so, right? Pac-12 Network being able to speak to the 12, different campuses. And I got to speak to a lot of journalism students in some great schools, whether it's Annenberg at USC, Cronkite at ASU. Like there's a real passion on the West Coast for broadcasting. And guys, like, I think it was sort of sad. I think in my almost 10 years, maybe I had 2 Asian American students on all those campuses in those journalism classes. And like, that was a little deflating to see, if I was being totally honest with you. So I always get worried about that pipeline and that next generation. It's how do you fuel that pipeline? And I think a lot of it comes down to storytelling and being introduced to not only the idea of like, hey, sports and a career in broadcast is a viable opportunity, but I also think it's important for representation on the athletic side, right? Taylor Rapp comes to mind. I know I'm sure you guys have been talking about it and thinking about it a lot with Linsanity and that 10-year anniversary, and how pivotal that was, I think, for the Asian American community, to see an Asian American who spoke English, who was balling out, just crushing teams coming down the floor. And in a lot of ways, where you guys, the New York City market. I grew up a Knicks fan on that side. I was working at ESPN at that time when Insanity was going around. And, my dad, for example, who was born in Hong Kong, he's not a sports fan. Like he's not. Like I always kind of joke, if you put Michael Jordan and Mike Tyson, together, he probably could tell you who was who, but I wouldn't bet money on it. But I remember when Insanity was happening, like he was calling pretty much on a daily basis to either tell me what Jeremy Lin did, which, like I said, Jordan Tyson, and he already knew the numbers for Jeremy Lin, which was really cool, or to just talk to me about it. So I think about those moments and how crucial they were. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's to come, at least, keeping my fingers crossed that is.
Right. I want to piggyback on that question Ken asked about the representation. Obviously, Michael Silver, who used to work for the NFL media, had a bombshell story that once he joined the Bally Sports after the Texans chairman / owner Cam McNair making jokes about China virus, that he withheld the story for several months after he left the NFL media. Mina Kimes, Pablo Torre, obviously. They have obviously carved their own niche, and they have also have made a strong presence through hard work and their dedication. But Ken and I obviously have had some conversations initially in our debut show that maybe people like Mina, despite her being on the NFL Live every single day, even during this off season, people like her probably haven't done enough to speak out on the raise awareness of our within our community. We're not trying to attack Mina for the sake of attacking, but for people like you and Mina, obviously, representations do matter. And we want with the NFL obviously being somewhat so nonchalant about what Cam McNair said, and yet they're being bombarded with the Brian Flores lawsuits about lack of representation in the coaching and the front office. It seems like I don't know. Do you feel like you feel being an afterthought? Being an Asian American working for the NFL Network, and obviously the league's stance on the about things like this.
Yeah, I can tell you from a personal standpoint, that perception, I think, just sort of being an afterthought, so to speak. I don't know. I think I think a lot of people in the community would tell you that a lot of times they feel like that. I would imagine that I wouldn't be the only one who would have similar feelings to the ones that you have, Stephen, about, different spots, different newsrooms that they've worked in. I'll be honest though. I mean, I was hired during COVID at NFL Network. I lived in San Francisco for, like I said, almost the last decade or so. And I think when I look at how that city had changed, when I think about the attacks that were happening, really, and I grew up in the Northeast, I went to college in New York City, so that's still home for me. So my last two real homes that I continue to consider in terms of living, those were inundated with attacks on the Asian American community. There were moments over the last, couple of years where I just didn't totally feel safe. I went to school in the Bronx. I would go home off of like the 4 train or the D train in the middle of the night and not be as worried as I was, a couple of years ago walking in broad daylight. Now, part of it has to do with the fact that I'm now 40 versus when I was like 21 and didn't think I didn't have a care in the world. But, the point is like the environment's changed. And I think, to circle back to your original question, I say that to highlight when I got to NFL Network, there was obviously, and there still are, a lot of attacks in the Asian American community against defenseless individuals. And to their credit, I had posted pre-COVID, an article about immigration because I had seen, a lot of the stories about families that were getting separated. And to me, that was heartbreaking. I think about my family's path, we can get into it if you want, but, I wrote that piece and it was on Medium, right? And I went to my bosses at NFL Network and said, hey, like, I think this is really important. This is something I want to write about. Happy to do it, on my own platforms. But if this is something that you guys want to include in your coverage on .com, like I'm happy to, to send it to you guys and we can post it there. And, candidly, I would tell you, I was hoping they would say yes. But I'm a brand new employee, haven't met anyone in person. And to their credit, like that, the answer was yes, of course. And they let me go and use their platform. And look, NFL.com is as popular a site as you're going to get, from a sports perspective. So, Stephen, for me, I wouldn't be able to tell you, hey, like, I feel like an afterthought. They've allowed me to use and leverage their platforms to speak about something that, to me, I'm really passionate about, because I think it's really important. Because I just don't think there's enough conversation about it. And I've said this before. I think the conversations are vastly different in the Asian American community about these attacks, because I think, and this is the disappointing thing, I think the conversations are mostly within our own community as opposed to other communities talking about it. And that, to me, is why it's really important to use and leverage something like NFL.com to speak out about it. But, and just one other point, and I don't want to ramble about this, Stephen, but I had a conversation with someone about this a while ago, and I do think it's important to recognize, like, I might be disappointed, you might be disappointed that someone's not using their platform to speak out. And I think there were times when I'm like, man, like, there's some people who've got, way more followers than I have, and are way more notable, and are doing these great shows, and are like, sort of like the Mount Rushmore in the community. But then, I'm like, why aren't they saying a little bit more? Like, damn, like, you guys have, that power to,
Sure.
To create more of a conversation. But I think at the end of the day, maybe it's just not, they're not comfortable with it, and it's not their time. And I don't want to judge and say, hey, because you have this following, you should do this, because it maybe just doesn't come off genuine. And I think part of it too is, like, from a cultural standpoint, like, what were we told? At least I was, dude, hard work, put your head down, grind it out, don't complain.
Right.
And I think that's a part of what this
The model
issue
minority
is.
theory.
Yeah, I think breaking out of that is really hard. And it's almost like, to talk about this stuff is the exact opposite of, like, from a cultural standpoint, where we're at, and also what we were kind of raised and taught to do. So, I'm always, I'd love to see it, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that maybe just people aren't always as comfortable with speaking out.
You mentioned, Mike, is that, and by the way, speaking with Mike Yam of the NFL Network, got to mention that, of course, and you see his Twitter handle right there on the screen as well. Mike, you also mentioned coming from an immigrant family. Stephen, myself, you have all had that experience of being the first generation here in the United States. What was that like to, and I can speak from my own experience being a sports fan and not having the parents saying, why don't you go into medicine? Why don't you being a scientist? Why don't you go to Harvard? Why are you disappointing me by going to the University of Rhode Island? What was it like to be that, have that experience as a first generation sports fan of the family?
Yeah, Rams versus Rams, Fordham Rams, Rhode Island Rams.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm with you there. It's really, to your point, Ken, it's a unique experience, right? Because it's challenging when you're going up against, like, these cultural norms. And I think a lot of it is, hey, look at the sacrifices of the previous generations. Look at what they had to do, and you're going to go and do what? Because that doesn't sound all that safe. And I would always joke, and I would joke even, years after the fact. After I graduated Fordham, I was very fortunate. I was able to get radio work pretty quickly at Sirius Radio, and, was able to work my way up, and I was doing stuff on ESPN Radio and then NBA TV. But in that time, I mean, it was almost like weekly. If I was talking to my parents, it'd be, are you going back to grad school? When are you going back to grad school? I'm like, no. Like, I'm doing okay. Like, I'm working up. I'm working, it'll be okay. And it wasn't until when I was working at NBA TV, they would take the fantasy show that I was doing, or the other, like, show of record that night, and they would put that on the Yes Network. So all of a sudden, some family friends would start seeing the show, and then that would trickle down. So maybe it was bi-weekly, the asks about going to grad school. So it started to slow down, and then I got the job at ESPN, and then it really started to slow. And then I stopped hearing about going back to grad school. The odd thing is, I actually took a grad school class at the University of Hartford because I thought about going to get my master's, and then I ended up getting an opportunity at Pac-12. So I left that area, and I didn't go back. But the appreciation from an educational standpoint, as I got a little bit older, I did appreciate that class time a little bit more than I did when I was at Fordham.
Mike, let's kind of look back at the NFL this past year.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Rams won the Super Bowl, as they were somewhat expected to. what stood out to you about the NFL this past year?
Yeah. I think there's a lot. The fact that the Rams went for it and it paid off, because we've seen teams in a variety of sports do similar things to what the Rams had done, which is, make some marquee trades, sign some notable free agents, and it doesn't always play out that way. So the fact that they were able to get to the Super Bowl with some of the issues, because I think there were some chemistry issues down the stretch. I mean, Matthew Stafford at times played really well, and he was, came on like gangbusters in the playoffs. So those last couple games of the regular season, he was throwing some picks. So that became at least a cause for concern on my end. But across the board, I think that the one thing that also struck me was this. Look, Tom Brady, as he exits, that's one thing. Aaron Rodgers still sort of at this peak at a really elevated age, but yet still one of the best in the league. But I think about the young crop of quarterbacks and the future of this league at that position, which by all accounts, I mean, we always think about, the NFL. To have success, you have to have a good quarterback. I mean, there's outlier situations there, but holistically, that's got to be the fundamental cornerstone of every organization. And I think across the board about some of the young pieces that we have, whether it's the rookie quarterbacks, and I know Mac Jones, started out hot and cooled a little bit, but just think about Josh Allen, what he was able to do. Burrow certainly comes to mind. Maybe if Baker Mayfield is healthy, he's still a guy. Lamar Jackson, who if he's healthy is still a dude. I just think about these pieces. Justin Herbert from the Chargers, Patrick Mahomes. How can I forget about him? Derek Carr, signing potentially a new massive deal and what he can do for that organization. Dak Prescott when he's healthy. We saw Dallas flash. But the point is, there's so many great quarterbacks that are. I don't even know if they've totally hit their peak. So I just think about that game between the Chiefs and the Bills, how entertaining that was. And the idea that we could be getting that on a somewhat regular basis on Sundays or Thursdays or Mondays, like, to me, is a really cool thing. And I think we're seeing that foundation right now for a lot of those franchises in the league.
Mike, you've also seen, as you mentioned, you're at the Pac-12 Network, saw that pipeline from a lot of kids that you were covering over the last 10 years, are now in the league and playing on Sundays when they were playing on Saturdays. What's it like when you see a kid that you saw playing at Stanford or playing for Oregon or playing at Arizona, making it in the NFL and saying, wow, I remember when I saw this kid?
I love it. I think one of the coolest parts, Ken, about that job was, we were owned by the universities. So it was a little different, in terms of the makeup. So your relationships and the access that you had as a broadcaster was just different versus whether if I was working at Fox or an ESPN and covering some of those teams and just being on those campuses and developing relationships with those coaches and those players. So when you say to me, like, what's it like to see some of those guys thrive? I got to tell you, it is awesome, especially the ones that you got to know when they were a little bit younger, because you don't always get access to, freshmen and sophomores, because they're not playing at that level. So it's, juniors and seniors that you're usually talking to. But when you can see a kid grow over time and then become a pro, or his backstory, or you met his parents because you were doing a road show and they came over and they said, oh, we're watching, what you guys are doing. Like, to me, that connection is awesome. And it was one of the coolest things, still one of the things that I miss the most. But, I still feel like I'm an honorary member of that league and all 12 of those teams, because I still root for all the coaches. I root for all those players. And it's really, I see them have success, because I also do know that it is different in that league when you talk about the academic side of things and how demanding some of those institutions are day to day for some of those student athletes. And it's not the same across the board. The Big Ten's got some really great universities as well, but I do think that some other programs and some other conferences don't have necessarily the same demands. So that to me just gives them a little bit more street cred.
All right, before we let you go, let's do some, rapid fire questions this upcoming off season. Aaron Rodgers, is he staying or going?
Staying. I think they'll figure out the money. And look, I mean, every single year, I know this is rapid fire, but they're consistently one of the best teams in the league. So unless there's another spot for him where they can compete like that, I think he's staying. Before
we go to the next question, I'll let you continue that, Stephen. Our next guest is going to talk about Aaron Rodgers, Lily Zhao, who from Fox. Great fans. I'm very glad you mentioned that. So go ahead, Stephen.
I'm hanging tight after to get the take on the 411 on all this.
Absolutely. Jimmy G, where is he going, in your opinion?
He won't be wearing a Niners uniform. That I know for sure. And I almost feel bad now just because of the success that he's had with that organization, getting to the Super Bowl and, kind of knocking on the door even this year. God, I wouldn't even venture a guess on where he could go. I do, in my mind, there's something about that Pittsburgh sort of vibe and being a placeholder if they decide to go in the draft and go young with the quarterback spot. Although then maybe Jimmy's doing the same thing that he did in San Francisco, which is getting another quarterback behind him ready to start playing.
Tom Brady.
Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
Tom Brady coming back, yes or no, and will he replace Jimmy G?
It's a wrap. It's a wrap. I don't buy it for a second. Giselle says you're done. You're done. Sorry, right? I mean, think about all that. Hey, I got to spend time with my family. The kids. That's code for wife saying it's done. It's done. I had fun for a good. He's still the GOAT. He can still do his deal, but he's not coming back.
We've been working to get his agent Don Yee for quite some time. So hopefully, maybe he can, if he's willing to come on to our show. Hopefully he can fill us in on the stories.
That's must listen because you guys will get the real story behind that retirement.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Russell Wilson, is he staying or going?
I want to say he stays just because I think there's something really cool about he wasn't healthy this year. And when he is, there's a part of me that says, hey, can Seattle put more pieces around him and can they thrive? Can they figure out some of those defensive issues? But at the end of the day, Russell's calculated. I don't think he does this now back-to-back off seasons where there's comments and was obviously more so last year. But I think because of that, there's a part of me that says he's not going to be with those guys.
And I have to ask you, since I'm a URI Rams fan and you're a Fordham Rams, and we're both in the same conference. Fordham, people talk about the Syracuse Illuminati, but Fordham has a great pipeline. You start with Mike Breen, you start with all the people who have come out of Fordham. Talk a little bit about that Fordham pipeline.
It is. Can you just put that on a tee for me? In the
go ahead.
Best way
just go ahead
possible,
and hit it out.
Look, Syracuse is at least double the size. They got 2 radio stations on that campus. They got all these kids going through that program. Pound for pound, there is not a better broadcast school in the country than Fordham. You mentioned Mike Breen. We got the voice of the Knicks. We got the voice of the Yankees and Michael Kay. We got the Brooklyn Nets voice and Chris Carino. We got the voice of the Giants and Bob Papa. The list goes on and on. And I've got Spiro Adidas. We got Tony Real. My man Andrew Bogusch. There's enough names that have had success over the years. And look, I mean, it goes really at the top. And how can I forget about Vin Scully, right? I mean, the original OG when it comes to those broadcasters. It's an incredible program. It changed my life. The opportunities that I had there were second to none. I mean, you get thrown into the mix. It's funny, you mentioned Syracuse. I still talk to, in Sirius, we have some interns and some of them that go through that program. And it's funny to hear about their path and how much time it takes for them to earn a spot on air. And, we had to earn it as well, but we just didn't have the sheer volume that they did. I mean, I was a freshman getting opportunities on air. And I think about how valuable those reps were early on in my career and how it shaped me. So I can't say enough good things. It's a public radio station. I got to cover the Knicks. We got credentials for all the New York teams. It was awesome. And Kyle Neptune is now turning around this basketball program to the point where we're hovering around 500 at the end of February. I'll take that. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully it just gets better because we are good broadcasters. We need better ballers is what we
Absolutely.
need. So.
Absolutely.
Mike Yam, we're going to have you back. We'll talk a little bit more about URI and Fordham, the Rams versus Rams, as we get on the line.
We'll get it going. Yeah. No, honestly, it's awesome to be with you guys. Really appreciate the invite. Appreciate what you guys are trying to accomplish as well. And make sure Lily gives you the 411 on Aaron Rodgers. I need to hear it.
Absolutely. Hope to see you in the West Coast, Mike. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Anytime.
Absolutely. And Mike Yam of the NFL Network, thank you so much for joining us.
You,
we'll have Lily Zhao coming up from Fox 6 in Milwaukee talking about the Green Bay Packers and a little guy named Aaron Rodgers. We'll talk about him. Not little, exactly, but a little. You know what I mean. That's coming up next on the AA team as we continue here on the Barroom Network. Coming up next.
So you got Kyle Hendricks, Marcus Stroman, they're the 1-2 for sure. Then you got Wade Miley, Adbert Alzolay, a couple other guys trying to make that rotation and be the 5th starter. what do you make of the rotation as a whole? Because to me, they're a very underrated rotation that could lead to the Cubs actually having a fair amount of success. I know they got a long way to go with their starting lineup and the offense with after, some of the moves that have been made over the last year or so. But man, that rotation has a chance to be really good. Bringing in Wade Miley was a solid move.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of veteran presence. And Jed Hoyer talked about, we have these young, exciting pitchers, but you can't build a pitching staff just around young, exciting guys. So you get veterans in him and then Kyle Hendricks. I think a lot hinges, because we kind of know where those top three in the rotation are going to be from year to year. Where the Cubs ceiling really hinges is at the bottom of that rotation and which of those young guys can really click and really grow. I mean, we've seen Alzolay grow from year to year, but he still is working on new pitches and really trying to reach that ceiling, which I don't think we quite know where that's going to be yet.
And we're back on the AA team here on the Barroom Network. Great stuff with Mike Yam, Stephen. I tell you, he came in like a ball of fire today.
Absolutely. It was well worth the wait for us to have Michael. He's obviously works for the network. He knows a lot about the league. He's one of the few people who are obviously AAPI people working in the industry. And it was so great to hear his perspective. Working for the network, his background, and the AAPI issues, representations, everything else in between.
And let's talk about to another person in the AAPI community, covers football. Another person I've been lobbying to have this person on for quite some time. I'm glad she's on with us now. Lily Zhao of Fox 6 in Milwaukee, covers the Green Bay Packers. Been covering the Packers for quite some time. And earlier this season, we had on our new best friend, Melissa Kim, who is now with the Baltimore Ravens. She raved about you as well, Lily. So great to have you on.
First of all, thank you guys so much for bringing me on. It's a pleasure. I loved hearing Mike talk. I love Melissa and all the work she's doing with the Ravens. So it is amazing to have representation in the world of sports. And I love what you guys are doing here as well. So thank you again for having me on.
Thank you so much. And I was joking earlier with Steve and said Packers are just so boring these last seasons. So many. Nothing ever happens at Green Bay, especially with Aaron Rodgers. I know that's being a little sarcastic there, but I'm telling you, it just seems just like the NFL on its own is a 24/7 beat. The Packers are themselves their own 24/7 beat, Lily.
They really are. And, this is a team that when you're from a place like Green Bay, Wisconsin, that's kind of all you have. You just have Packers football. You have, once Packers football is done, you have the offseason of Packers football. You have the combine, you have the draft. So it's basically, 365 deal there in Green Bay. And now with the future of the quarterback and kind of where his journey lies, and that's, now that the season's over and we've had a couple weeks to digest, not making the Super Bowl again, it's now the question of where's he going to go. And maybe this week we'll have a decision. We're not sure yet, but we're all ready to go if he does make a decision like tomorrow.
Right.
What is it like to cover him in Green Bay as, from an AAPI perspective? Obviously, Wisconsin is not exactly known for, its diversity. And, we touched with Michael about lack of representation even within the NFL and the media itself.
Yeah, I will say when I first, I've been covering this team since 2015, so for a long time now. And I will say one year where there actually was representation was the year that, me and Melissa Kim, she was in Madison, I was in Green Bay. We had Josh Tolentino, who covers the Eagles now. He was also on the beat for The Athletic covering the Packers. And that one year was the one year where we had 3 Asian Americans covering one team, which was, I don't think, ever heard of in Wisconsin. And, sadly, that's not the case anymore. It's just me now in Wisconsin holding it down for everybody. But it is very rare. I mean, it's Midwest. It comes with the territory, but I would like to see, Asian Americans trying to come this way because the sports here are good. I know, there's a lot of Asian Americans on the East Coast, the West Coast, in the South as well, but not a lot of us here in the Midwest. And good sports teams to cover. It is cold. I'm from the Midwest, so I'm used to it. But it'd be nice to see more faces like me here. So I'm just trying to hold it down for everybody here in Wisconsin.
You mentioned Green Bay, and of course, you were in Green Bay, covering for the station that's WFRV is there. So what was it like living there 24/7, living, breathing Packers, living, breathing that beat, and also hosting your own show there?
Yeah, I will say I love that job. It was a job where I got to travel. I got to cover every single Packers game. I hosted a show, like you mentioned, every week talking about the Packers. So it was just kind of an overload of information. But again, I loved it because, pre-COVID, we were in the locker rooms. We were creating these relationships with players that we sadly don't have now. Everything now is via Zoom. And I know a lot of people have talked about who cover sports. It's changing the landscape of covering sports, especially on the local market side, has changed drastically because of the pandemic. And now it's all on Zoom. But I will say, just back in my time in Green Bay, it was, because I was hosting a show, because I had players on that show from the team, I was creating a different kind of relationship that you wouldn't normally get at another kind of station because you're not having that one-on-one access all the time. And I will say, luckily for me, when I started in Green Bay, I created a really great relationship with Aaron Jones, Pro Bowl running back for this team. And luckily that's carried over into my time here in Milwaukee because he does post-game shows with us as well. James Jones, former Packer, does post-game shows with us as well. So I've been able to cultivate those relationships here in Milwaukee, but in Green Bay, it was just, you live, you breathe Packers football. I mean, it was, like I mentioned, the start of the season, preseason, training camp, going before that, the draft, the combine. It's 365. There's always something going on. You have the Packers brass are talking, the players are talking, they're doing their off-season charity work. You cover that as well. So it's not always 100% football here because a lot of these guys have charities. They have things that they host outside of Lambeau Field. And so we were covering that as well. But getting to know those guys on a very personal level was super fun for me. And who knows when it's going to get back to that, if ever, in the NFL at least, just having that access in the locker room. And I know we've talked about Aaron Rodgers a little bit earlier, but I will say, when I first got there, Aaron's locker is the closest locker to kind of the doorway in the locker room. And the amount of people there for a Wednesday Aaron Rodgers media availability was something like you'll never see. It was just a sea of people. And especially when it was playoff time. I mean, that scrum got so big, but it was just such a different atmosphere now or back then than it is now. But I miss it. I miss it, guys. But it was fun. It was fun.
Is Aaron Rodgers, we the Bears fans, myself included, we have a lot of feelings about, Aaron Rodgers. Is Aaron Rodgers being misunderstood, or is just that's who he is? Whether he's a jerk or not, he probably doesn't give a what, and he just basically beats to his own drum. Is that who he is basically?
You know what? He's a guy that I don't think he ever says anything he doesn't mean. I will say, having covered him for the last 7 years now, the man says what he means, and there's never really any sort of wishy-washiness behind it, if that makes any sort of sense. He has his own opinions. He's entitled to those opinions, and whether or not people agree with him or not, that's just what he thinks. And that was what we covered for a long time. His views on A, B, and C. We had to cover those, and whether we agree with him or not, that's what we had to do in terms of the local coverage. But again, he doesn't say anything he doesn't mean. So that's that. And I know his. It kind of came into light though when his MVP voting came up, and there was one writer that said, "I'm not going to vote for him because he's not a good person," and his opinion, and that was debated here as well. And great player, has some thoughts that might not be agreeable with other people, but still Aaron Rodgers, so we still got to cover him here.
I know that you've gone from we heard from relax to all the way now to having appearances on the Pat McAfee show. And Lily, I follow you, so I see those tweets. So what is it like having to even call quotes from another show that's on the internet and very popular on Twitter as well?
Yeah, and that's just what's so different because of the pandemic. It's, again, we don't have an in-person interaction with him, so we can't even ask him those questions if we wanted to, because everything is very regimented in terms of our access to him on those media days. So now that he has a different platform where he can be more relaxed and kind of talk like he normally would talk, not that he doesn't talk normally with us, but just a more relaxed forum, I should say, and he can talk about a variety of topics that we normally wouldn't be able to ask him in a regular media setting. It's been a very different experience covering him the last, 2 years now that he's done Aaron Rodgers Tuesdays on the Pat McAfee show, because we're kind of always on alert of what's he going to say? What's he going to unveil? What anecdote, what story is he going to put out there that we can potentially ask him the next day? And now with COVID and all those issues that he's talked about, that was another thing that we were very hyper focused on. And now with the future of what he's going to do, and he did say, he wants to be in Indianapolis on the Pat McAfee show, explaining if he's retiring, getting traded, or just leaving, or staying. We're kind of all hyper focused now. So now there's a tweet that Pat McAfee tweeted out saying he is a big guest for tomorrow. So now the sensors are tingling. Well, is it Aaron Rodgers, or are we going to have to wait another week or so? So it's been definitely very different having to cover him on that show as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. From covering him the last couple of years, where do you think his head or his mind is right now? Does he want to stay, or is he plotting another exit strategy? Maybe not as dramatic as last year, but obviously Nathaniel Hackett going to Denver, obviously there's a connection there. Luke Getsy, who he was very, very high, obviously is the Bears' new offensive coordinator. And we'll get to that in a little bit later before the end of the show. But what do you think he wants to do?
That is the $1 million question, Stephen. I think a lot of us have speculated, does he retire? I don't think he's going to retire. Does he ask for a trade? If so, does he go to Denver? Does he follow his former offensive coordinator out there? Or does he stay? I think there's a lot of optimism here, at least, that he will return. The reports saying that there's optimism between him and the front office. Those talks have gone a lot better than they have in the past. And then, the reports of the Packers going all in to keep him in terms of potentially doing an extension. And then, of course, them hiring Tom Clements, to be quarterback's coach. He was a guy that was with Rodgers, a very influential coach in Rodgers' career early on when he won his only Super Bowl. So when they bring in a guy like that, are they going all in to try and keep him? The signs are all there that this team wants him back. Matt LaFleur, the head coach, has said time and time again, we'd be foolish not to want him back. I think there are a lot more signs saying he's going to stay, but again, who knows? He might have, when you heard the MVP speech, he thanked everybody at the Packers front office, the fans, for 17 great years. So was that kind of his goodbye speech to Green Bay? I don't know. I don't think he'll retire, but I think there's a little bit more optimism that he's going to return. But at this point, your guess is as good as mine.
Lily, let's talk a little. I asked this about to Mike earlier. What was it like for your journey? I mean, I asked him about what the role models were for him as he got into the business. What was it like for you?
It was definitely different because, growing up when I was very young, there were not a lot of just females in general on TV, let alone Asian American, men or women on TV. So it was a different, experience growing up. But I know, Mike talked about Michael Kim. He was one of those guys that I really looked up to because I said, somebody that looks like me can make it on TV. And he just was one of those forefront guys. Kevin Nagandi, I love as well. And they're so good at their jobs, and they're such a great, representation of everybody here, that those are kind of those role models that I looked up to. And then you look at the women. I mean, honestly, at this point in time in covering the NFL, I will say, these women in the NFL Network, Stacey Dales, Aditi, all those women, they empower women. And that's also very, very phenomenal because, I do feel like we're in a business where it's very cutthroat, it's very competitive. But when you have women of those stature in those positions where they can help mentor, that's really been a big help. I would say those women, Michael, Kevin, really laid the foundation for kind of getting me into this. And, granted, I grew up a sports fan, so I wanted to do this anyway. My dad got me into sports.
Right.
Big Gators fan, even though I didn't really live in Florida. So I always grew up loving football. And it just was very tough to see that there was really nobody that looked like me on TV. So, the journey's been a long time coming. There's still a lot of, steps to climb and where I ultimately want to go. But, I do feel like I have a good foothold here in the Midwest, and it's been fun. It's been fun meeting everybody in different AAJA groups and meeting those people in the industry that look like me but are across the country. So I think it's just phenomenal, the community that we've all created here.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. It's awesome. We definitely would love to have more connections with the AAJA community in some ways, because obviously there are a lot of people who are members that, who deserves a lot of airtime. And, we love to have them on, not just talk about sports, but obviously their journey and the current AAPI racism and all that stuff as well. In our show opening, Ken and I obviously talked about the Winter Olympics and the number of Asian Americans who have, certainly made their marks in the Olympics this year. And there's obviously Eileen Gu, who was born here, but also represented the, China. There's also one other athlete that I'm escaping my name, unfortunately. There were some articles, obviously, about having difficulty with their, identity and all that kind of stuff. Do you also encounter that, like identity, you yourself being an Chinese American?
Yeah, that's definitely something that, I've had to navigate, especially, I was born in the States. I've lived here my whole life. I've been overseas only a handful of times just with work and, other factors that kind of go into it. And so it's hard because, I again grew up in the Midwest. I went to school in Boston, so there's a lot more diversity in Boston. Sure. Finished school in California and LA, so there's more diversity out there. But, when I'm growing up in a predominantly Midwestern area, I will say I was very blessed in where I grew up. I'm from Indiana. The community I had was very diverse. So I was very fortunate to grow up with people that looked like me and that people who had very similar interests. And, luckily my family is still very traditional. So my parents are cooking, amazing home cooked meals. And, now my comfort food these days is something my mom cooked. It's something traditional. So, I will say growing up, it was kind of hard because again, you want to blend in, you want to fit in with these kids that, you think are cool in school. And so you want to do things that they want to do. But then, I think the older I get, especially going off to college, you're getting your first job, you're not really kind of knowing where you're at in the world. And the one thing that kind of pulls you back is your culture, your tradition, your favorite foods, your family. So, it definitely was a struggle growing up, but now that I've kind of gotten past that phase, it's really about just really embracing everything. So,
and of course, we heard about what happened to the St. Louis anchor as well, and now the hashtag Very Asian has come about, and it's something that I know that's been important to me, especially when you hear about dumplings and other things as well. So, what was it like for you to hear about something that happened in that situation, but also galvanizing the AAPI community, especially in television and media?
Yeah, so I've known Michelle Lee, the the anchor that happened to, when she was here in Madison. So I've known her for a long time, and she was always one of those women that I looked up to. When she was here, it was around the 2015 mark when I first started in Wisconsin. And I'm like, there's an Asian American female on TV in Wisconsin, and she was so down there. She was so lovely. And I was fortunate to be able to visit her when she worked in Seattle. And, she gave us a tour of her station, and she was so welcoming. And to see that happened to her, it was so discouraging. But I will say the kind of person that Michelle is, she's not going to let that get her down. And now that we have seen this huge movement, I'm like, that's something only Michelle can make happen. But, back to your question, though, it's, we have traditions like other cultures. We have things that we eat that are different than what people predominantly in the US eat. So you can't say that eating dumplings is, you're being you're slandering somebody else or whatever. And if anything, I think this whole movement has really opened people's eyes to what are dumplings? How do you make them? What do they taste like? Let's get them. I love that the trend there with the food, because I think food brings people together, right?
Absolutely.
So when you're eating delicious food like dumplings, it's hard to, really argue about that stuff. But I think that very Asian trend is really, really, really helpful in these times, especially when it's coming from Michelle, who's, a personality on TV, so she can really spread the message. Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. It's a positive message that she's obviously sending through in spite of, the attack that she did not deserve at all. I want to go back to the Packers again for just a moment. I asked you about Luke Getsy. I think a lot of Bears fans, myself included, on this network, we're very, very curious about what Luke Getsy brings to the table and how much of an influence he brings to the offense that was completely broken and embarrassed under Matt Nagy. What do you know about Coach Getsy, and about, do you have any stories about him?
You know what? Unfortunately, I don't have any personal stories with him, just because of, he wasn't an offensive coordinator on the Packers, so he wasn't, really presented to the media. But, I did get to meet him when he was first introduced on the team many, many years ago. But what I can tell you, though, just from covering the team for the last couple of years with him on staff, is that, he really rose in the ranks, though. He was hired early on and just kind of rose up. And I will say, when Aaron Rodgers mentions your name as being somebody influential in his career, it means that you're doing something right. He's mentioned Luke Getsy. He's mentioned Nathaniel Hackett, who's now in Denver, saying that both these guys deserve to be head coaches. And that's very high praise for a guy, from a guy like Aaron Rodgers. So, and a guy like Luke Getsy, right? I mean, you're tasking him with trying to figure out, what do we do with Justin Fields? What do we do with this offense that's been so stagnant, quote unquote, the last couple of years? I think he's going to really find a balance and just find a way to make it work for Justin, because let's face it, he's the future of this franchise. They're going to have to make it work somehow, right? Absolutely. Utilize his abilities. Don't really hamper him. Just let him have not free reign of the offense, but you gotta work to his skills. He's great on the run. He has a good arm. You just gotta make it work. And when you have a guy like Allen Robinson, who's turning down the Packers to stay in Chicago, gotta get the guy the ball. So it's very. I'm like, watching these Packers Bears games. Yeah, the defenses are always really good, but it's like the offense. It's like, come on, guys. But I do think that having a guy like Luke will really help energize and regalvanize things in Chicago. So I think it'll be fun. It'll be fun for you guys.
Hopefully it will be a more competitive Packers-Bears games going forward after Matt Eberflus. And it would be kind of funny if Allen Robinson ended up leaving to go replace Devontae Adams.
Wow.
Is he leaving? Do you think he's done?
Devontae?
Yes.
No, in Green Bay, I just think they would be foolish to let a guy like him go. I think they're going to do everything that they can to keep him, franchise tag, whatnot. Even though that wouldn't be ideal, but I think they're going to do everything in their power to keep a guy like Devontae. So I don't think he's leaving just yet.
Who are the notable Packers? Do you think they're either leaving or being a cap casualty?
Well, I think Zadarius Smith. That's kind of been the big one this week. When you're looking, I will say he was one of those guys when he first came in, and I got to know him really well. Phenomenal person, great personality, like so fun to interview, so many good stories. It just was unfortunate with his injury and the cap and everything that, he scrubbed all the Packers off of social media. So it's kind of, he's going to be a realistic casualty. Excited to see where he's going to go. But I would say a guy like him, and then you think of like a Mercedes Lewis. Can they keep him another year? I mean, he's got a lot of good qualities, but can they afford to do so? Adrian Amos, the safety. There's just a lot of really key guys that they brought in to really help this team that, unfortunately, the cap's the cap. So it's going to be tough because this really was the year for the Packers to make the Super Bowl and go all in, and unfortunately it didn't happen. So a lot of these good guys are sadly going to go.
You got to Milwaukee just in time for the Bucks championship season last year. something that I'm sure the Bucks fans have been waiting for a very, very long time. What was it like seeing that championship ride?
It was amazing. First of all, I've never covered an NBA team making it even close to making an NBA championship, so that was number one. But this team was so fun to cover, again, because you have a guy like Giannis who's the face of the franchise, right? I mean, he's telling dad jokes these days. Like that's his thing. He's so fun. But to answer your question, it was just pure pandemonium. People were everywhere, in the Deer District, inside Fiserv Forum. I mean, it was just a zoo. And then the parade, the day of the parade, I ended up walking the entire route from start to finish. And the amount of people was just like, I'm like, I don't know there was that many people in Milwaukee to begin with. But the parade was so fun. I don't know if we're going to have it anytime soon, but yeah, it was phenomenal. It was so fun to cover. So I'm hoping they make it back, but I don't know. I don't know this year.
But at least, to have your first season in Milwaukee and to cover a championship team, that's something you always remember.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I was like, come on, Brewers make a World Series so I can experience that too. I don't know if it's going to happen either.
That may take a while.
That
might
take a while, you know.
Yeah. But I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm good luck, Milwaukee. I'm good luck. I came here just in time.
Do you have obviously, I think moving up, and maybe in a couple of years we might see you as a sideline reporter for Fox, CBS, or even ESPN. Do you have that? Obviously, you have that aspiration, right?
Yeah. I think it'd be foolish for us not to, right? It's you want to achieve the highest level, and I think
Sure.
that's definitely on my radar. I'm definitely very much enjoying what I'm doing here in Milwaukee, and then when my time is up here, we'll see where I go, and hopefully it is one of those steps, and that would just be great. I just think in terms of just representation, in terms of representation for Asian Americans and for females and women in the business who want to get in, and little girls who are thinking, hey, I look like her. Maybe one day if I want to do this, I can get to that level too. So that's really kind of also part of the drive to get to that level, is to set an example and just be a trailblazer in this business, like a lot of us are, just paving the way for other people who want to do this in the future, to say that they did it, I can do it too. So that's really a big motivator for me, and also just seeing how high you can go. I always love that challenge.
Well, Lily Zhao, you're a great follow on Twitter. Been following you for a couple of years.
Thank you.
Love your tweets, especially covering the Rogers beat. I know it's not easy, but always appreciate it. Thank you for coming on with us, and we appreciate it, and we'll definitely have you on again.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you
you guys so much. It was lovely to meet you, and I love what you guys do. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. We'll hope to have you again.
We appreciate it. And the AA team continues on the Barroom Network after this.
Really understanding the difference between empowerment and agency versus objectification. And the difference is always who has the power. If I choose that I feel my best and I look my best and I'm the most confident in a certain outfit, then I am empowering myself to make that choice and to tell you that I'll show you who I am and let you know who I am. You can't make those decisions based off what I'm wearing. But if it's objectification because the producers or directors or whoever runs the show is saying you have to wear a dress every show and high heels have to be this high, and you have to dye your hair blonde, it's a very different thing, right? So I do think we have to remember that, because a lot of people will look at women who are stepping into their own sexuality and accuse them of not being also allowed to talk about harassment and other things. They're very different things. It's about choice and power.
Back with the AA team, Ken Fang on Stephen Negishi. What a great show we had. We had Mike Yam of the NFL Network and Lily Zhao of Fox 6 in Milwaukee. Great discussions, and it was great to see and hear about their journeys, about where they came from and what they were looking for. And what's interesting, a common thread I keep hearing of people who are in television is the role that Michael Kim, formerly of ESPN, I think he was working at one time for Stadium. I don't know if he's still, but what an influence he has had on a lot of Asian TV sports reporters, and it was great to see that and great to hear that as well.
Absolutely. Stadium being in Chicago, so there's a familiarity for, I think, a lot of our people within our own network based in Chicago could identify. And we hope to have a legend like Michael Yam have on our show and just pay tribute to the impact that he has had on the AAPI community.
Absolutely. And again, thanks to Mike and thanks to Lily. And don't forget to follow them on Twitter. We had their Twitter handlers on earlier during the show, and we thank them very much for coming on. Let's wrap up this segment, Stephen. Let's wrap up the show. We'll talk about the Super Bowl, which was a couple of weeks ago, but of course, it was on in between our last show. So we both predicted the Los Angeles Rams. We knew they were built for this season. It was a very exciting Super Bowl. It came right down to the wire. That Cincinnati Bengals offensive line is just horrible. I mean, here's a game which another Super Bowl, and I know Bengals fans don't want to hear this, but this is coming from a Browns fan, so please forgive me. 3 Super Bowls in which they come down to the final minutes and they are down by 1 score and lose, or at least they were up by a score, especially in the last Super Bowl against previous Super Bowl against San Francisco back in the 1980s, and of course this one against the Rams. I know it's painful; it's going to hurt for a while, but their offensive line, and when you have someone like Aaron Donald who wants to get through, he is going to find a way to get you. And I just that offensive line was like a sieve, especially in the second half.
Absolutely. It's a painful reminder for Bears fans like myself on 2 counts. One, we missed out on Aaron Donald in the 2014 NFL draft.
Yes.
He was a 1 pick. He was picked one pick ahead of the Bears. The Bears had the 14th and the Rams had 13th. And obviously the rest is history. And then, the offensive line, we saw this past year, the beating that, Justin Fields and Andy Dalton took, and just goes to show how bad the offensive line is. And obviously both Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace basically did absolutely nothing when it comes to schematic changes and upgrading that unit during their tenure, which thankfully led to their downfall. I'm not celebrating anybody losing their jobs, but if anybody who deserves it, unfortunately, it's just both of them, and it's quite telling that neither one of them has landed a job at this point. Maybe they're just basically sitting out a year, with their contracts still being paid off by the Bears organization. But obviously, that's neither here nor there. But it's a lesson that offensive line still matters, protection still matters. And if the Bengals had, the Bengals unfortunately learned it the hard way. They had 2 boneheaded misses, I think on 4th and 1. The first quarter near midfield, they could have probably run it with Joe Mixon, who's a great back. Mm-hmm. And then, they turn it over on downs. The Rams marched down the field and scored the first touchdown, if you remember, after that turnover, failed 4th down attempt. So, it's a lesson in life. Sometimes people complicate things, when they could have just, go ahead and just run it. Even with the bad offensive line, Joe Mixon still put up a very productive, season. So if you're going to go for it there, just run it, just run it past, their defensive line, not necessarily at, Aaron Donald, but obviously they could have probably done it better. And I don't know if it's just basically, Zach Taylor just got caught up emotionally. So that's probably one of the turning points of the ball game that I think, when I think about it, that really stood out to me, just how, badly the Bengals botched that game, in my opinion.
And of course, on the last drive, the 3rd down play, when they did try to run the ball on 3rd down, when they should have really passed that ball there, you have Jamar Chase, you're trying to save the clock. You really need to get out of bounds and do a 1st down. They ran the ball there instead. And then, of course, Aaron Donald came in and pretty much ended the game on the next play. So
Mhm.
pretty much, as you mentioned, Bengals need help on the offensive line. 7 sacks for the against the Bengals in their wild card game against the Tennessee Titans, and
Sure.
then of course it really didn't. They got away with it in that game when they came back and won, but of
Sure.
course they didn't. When you're going against a superior defensive line like the Los Angeles Rams, you could have they could have had the Great Wall of China at that point, but Aaron Donald would have probably gotten that through that too. So
Right. It finally caught up to them at an unfortunate time, The clock struck midnight, unfortunately. So
Yep. You see the guest coming up on future shows here on the Double A team, and we look forward to having the following people on over the next few weeks. Let's talk really quickly about the halftime show. I thought it was, as someone who loves Prince, I'm going to say that this particular halftime show with Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, you had 50 Cent, Eminem, and also Mary J. Blige. I'm going to say that was the best halftime show ever.
Yeah, don't forget Kendrick Lamar too. There,
of course, Kendrick Lamar. Can't forget.
Right. It was a very entertaining show. Brought back some memories of
absolutely,
being in Southern California. The West Coast rap. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Having watched the movie. I forgot the name. God, geez. Straight Outta Compton. Sorry, their story. It was just so reminiscent, and I was thoroughly entertained. Obviously, it doesn't appease everybody, especially the older crowd who obviously wants nothing to do with the rap. But I think a lot of 30s, 40s, crowd, who attended the game, obviously remember, when they were, in their teenage years, listening to these musics, and I hope they got their money's worth. It'll be interesting to see, where the halftime show goes, because I think Pepsi's done after this was Pepsi's last halftime show. So we'll be, it's kind of interesting to see, obviously, names like Verizon, which already is a media sponsor, with the streaming and all the other stuff that that they're capable of. Obviously, maybe they can take over and take the production to different heights. Who knows? But if this was a Pepsi's last one, it was certainly a memorable one. They went out with a bang for sure.
And what's interesting is that Jay-Z is responsible now for the halftime shows, so his production show is into it, and I think his influence on it definitely showed, because instead of having aging rockers, and as someone who aging myself, I have no problem with seeing the Who, but you're trying to get a certain audience. I think this really touched a certain audience, especially the Gen X audience, then the millennials audience, and I think that's who the NFL is trying to reach here, and especially, and also Kendrick Lamar too, although he had to censor a few lyrics as well. Commercials. There it is, and of course, Eminem did his thing by kneeling down. Allegedly, the NFL told him not to do it. Eminem said he did it anyway. So
right. The NFL later said that they didn't tell him to do that. So obviously, there's nothing to be butthurt about. And also, Anderson .Paak, the Grammy Award winner there doing the drums, that was also another surprise element there as well.
Yeah. And lastly, your favorite commercial, Steven?
I tweeted out the Rocket Mortgage one with Anna Kendrick. I thought it was a funny take on the the current house marketing bubble. That was actually a well done one. And what else? The thing that really stood out was basically a lot of electric cars and crypto. Obviously, those are the things that still, and I think that's somewhat of a trend now. I think going forward, we saw the BMW. I believe it was a BMW with the Arnold Schwarzenegger and what's the Selma Hayek?
Yeah,
we saw Polestar. That did not look very appealing in my opinion. And Kia's obviously the stylish electric car with the the electric robot. That I think that was I think I noticed somewhat of a trend there too.
Yep. I'm going to say my favorite ad. I know everyone's talking about the Rocket Mortgage ad, but for me, it was Chevy Silverado, and seeing Jamie Lynn
Yeah.
Sigler, and also the actor who played AJ Soprano. Of course, The Sopranos are also using A3C. The A3 Woke Up This Morning theme from The Sopranos, and almost doing shot for shot that great opening that The Sopranos had on HBO, bringing back to the series. So I'm going to have to, that's my favorite ad. And when I heard that theme, I'm like thinking, I started singing the theme. I'm thinking, all right, where The Sopranos, and of course it brings back, of course, to those great thoughts about James Gandolfini, who of course died in his 50s, the great actor who played Tony Soprano. So I had, that was my favorite commercial. So that was mine. Any thoughts on the upcoming guests that we're going to have, Stephen?
So the next show, I believe, we're 2 weeks from now, will be March 7th. We're expected to have author Chris Herring, who is a Chicago native and Northwest journalism school background. He wrote a bestseller about the 90s New York Knicks. So we're very, very excited to talk to him, another Chicago native. And then we're expected to talk the second guest on the 7th, Mark Kim, who is a Missouri graduate, another fine journalistic school, working for ESPN and then now the Athletics media team. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 21st, we're looking to have Eric Winalda, former U.S. men's national team player, a legend, and then former Fox Sports commentator, to talk about the final 3 games of the United States Qatar World Cup qualifier. And then Jonah Jabad, who's a Persian sports reporter at the WFAA in Dallas. He's a big Bengals fan, obviously, following on his social media. I used to live in Dallas, so I've followed his career, obviously working for the legendary Dale Hansen, who retired last year. I'm very, very excited to have another guest like Jonah Javad, who is very close with Leah Rahimi in Chicago with the 670 The Score, who's another Persian herself.
Right. And someone who's a big Metallica fan, by the way, and does great job with did a great job with NBC Sports Chicago, and now is I think she's on The Score. Is she on the?
Yes, 670 The Score.
Right?
Bernstein and Rahimi middays.
Yep. That's one person we should have on the show, by the way.
Absolutely.
And by the way, we will be. Apologies early if we get her on the show. I will be talking Metallica with her quite a bit. So
if we have her in the future, for absolutely, I'm a big Metallica fan too. So.
Oh, excellent! This is good to know.
I love their songs too. So
we will be talking Metallica. I don't think we'll be talking sports during that segment. We'll just talk Metallica. So anyway,
we'll try to sneak in. We'll try to sneak in a little bit too, because she also worked for the NBC's Olympic coverage. So we're definitely keen on talking about that experience if we can get her on, and we'll definitely do our best to get her on too. So.
Absolutely. So that's it for this program. We'd like to thank once again Michael Yam of the NFL Network and the great Lily Zhao of Fox 6 in Milwaukee. We had, if you missed it, it'll be on YouTube and also on the platforms where you can get podcasts as well, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all that place. Thank you very much for watching the Barroom Network and the AA team. For Stephen Negishi, I'm Ken Fang. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.